The Intel B660 chipsets motherboard are finally here, and this means that those who want to experience the 12th gen Intel Core processors but don't want to spend extra on the features of the Z690 motherboard can finally, go for a cheaper alternative if they want to experience the 12th gen Core processors. Well, just like the Z690 motherboards, the B660 also comes with support for DDR4 and DDR5, though they come in different variants which supports either one of it. Well, that is meant to cater for different users because DDR5 is still on shortage, so if those users who can't find DDR5 memory modules but still have DDR4 memory modules, they can just stick with DDR4 because it will work just fine. And in this video, we'll be looking at the B660 chipset motherboard from MSI, which is the B660M MORTAR Wi-Fi DDR4. So let's see what kind of features and performance we can expect from this motherboard right here. Now, as the name itself suggests, we can see the M in the name, which means that it's an mATX form factor motherboard. And for this model, because of the DDR4 there, it means that this model will only support DDR4 memory modules. We're not going to go too deep into what kind of features it has right here, but here's some information for you in case you want to know a little bit more about what you can expect from this. So it has a 14-phase power design, which offers 12 of the phase directly onto the V cores, which is for the processors, while the rest, 1+1, will go to the system agent and the integrated graphics. In terms of the memory modules, it supports up to 4 memory modules, and of course, with 4 memory modules, you get up to 128 GB in total. As for the speed, it can go up to DDR4 4800, but that depends on the model of theme you're going for. So you have to refer to the QVL list on the official product page to know more and see whether the model you're going for will be compatible with this motherboard right here. In terms of network connectivity, you will get one 2.5 gigabit LAN port, which is, I would say, mainstream nowadays, and of course Wi-Fi 6. And for the USB port, well, I would say it's quite a lot. Compared to some of the mATX form factor motherboard I've seen nowadays, the B660M MORTAR Wi-Fi DDR4 actually comes with 8 USB ports at the back. That includes the usual Type A and 1 Type C. Now for the storage, of course, you get 4 SATA ports right here if you still want to connect to maybe a mechanical hard drive or perhaps a SATA SSD. Of course, your usual M.2 SSD is always the choice. And on the B660, you will get 2 M.2 slots that supports up to Gen 4 SSDs. Now let's take a look into the kind of performance, memory overclocking, or gaming you can expect from the MORTAR Wi-Fi. Now for the memory, because the B660 actually locks the overclocking for your CPU, unfortunately, but they actually allow memory overclocking, though that will depend on the CPU you're using, whether it's a K variant or a non-K, because from our test we realized that while the B660 allows you to actually overclock your memory modules, but that depends on the CPU you're using, because the non-K SKUs of the 12th gen processors actually has the system agent voltage locked at 0.9 V range, which is very unfortunate, I would say, because if you're using a 3600 XMP kit, well, you'll definitely get an error when you're doing memory stability test. Because from our test, the highest we can go with the B660 is actually DDR4 3466, which actually requires some effort to tune with the timings. So if you're actually going for the DDR4 variant models, the chance of you surviving with a DDR4 3600 memory modules is pretty much 0. So I recommend you to stick with a DDR4 3200 instead, because that's the most stable we can see so far. As for those of you who decide to go with a K variant in order to get a higher memory speed, well, yes, for our test, we managed to go up to DDR4 4000, CR16 and Gear 1 with this motherboard. But yes, that's a catch. You cannot overclock your CPU. So this put the B660 at a rather awkward position because the situation is like you're lifting a stone that's pressing on your left leg and move it on to your right leg. So you can only move either one of it. Of course, you will be able to go higher than DDR4 4000, but for our case, we decide that DDR4 4000 is probably the best for us in terms of the result and stability, because if you want to go higher than DDR4 4000, you end up with Gear 1 for the memory, so that's technically halving the performance as compared to what you get with Gear 1. So for my recommendation, it's best for you to stick with DDR4 4000 if you want to go with Gear 1. Well, unless you have a very strong IMC for your CPU that gives you better advantage to go further than that. Now, moving on to the gaming performance. As I mentioned just now, because the K variant will allow you to go for higher memory frequencies, that gives the K CPU a better advantage on that, because it will be able to take advantage of higher memory frequencies to deliver better performance when it comes to games. Now, we have done a small comparison with a few selected titles, so you can take a look at this graph for your reference. So from the graph, we can see that the KSKU obviously gives you better performance, which reflected in the numbers for the minimum frames and average frames. So if you manage to go with a K variant CPU, yes, going for DDR4 4000 will definitely give you a much better performance as compared to DDR4 3200 or DDR4 34 and 66, which is something that is limited if you only go with the non-K variant CPU for the 12th gen Intel Core processors. So moving on to the temperature, yes, this is probably something that some of you might care, but from our test, I would say the temperature is actually looking decent as compared to what we've experienced with some of the Z690 motherboard. For the MOSFET temperatures, the highest we can see on the B660 MORTAR Wi-Fi DDR4 right here is actually 60. So that is actually better than the Z690 variant of what MSI has to offer. You can refer to our Z690 Force Wi-Fi review if you are interested to know what kind of temperature it gives. All the MOSFET temperature seems to be fine, but that's not the case for your chipset temperature, because throughout our stress test, we can see that the chipset on the B660M MORTAR Wi-Fi DDR4 can actually go up to 70. Though if you have a reasonable airflow for your system, it will not be a big issue because the airflow will actually take the heat away and give you slightly better temperatures, I would say. Because throughout our test, we haven't encountered any instability because of the slightly higher PCH temperature or the chipset temperature. So do take note of that if you really want to go with this motherboard. Okay, so now looking at some of the data we have to present regarding to the B660M MORTAR Wi-Fi DDR4, I would say this motherboard is still acceptable, I would say. And looking at the price, which is listed on MSI Lazada official store, the B660M MORTAR Wi-Fi DDR4 is priced at 899 ringgit, which I think is still a little bit on the higher side because of the tier it's in. For mid-range B660, I would say it's not really what we get to see in the past, which is slightly lower than that. But it's still an option for those users who wants to experience a 12th gen Intel CPU early but don't want to pay extra for features they will not even be using, like on the enthusiast grade Z690 motherboard. And of course, let's not forget that DDR5 memory module is still not widely available yet in the market because of the ongoing shortage, and of course, scalpers getting the kits, try to sell it at higher price so that they can earn some extras. So this actually gives DDR4 models, regardless of Z690 or B660 motherboard, a selling point right there, because DDR4 memory modules is a lot more easier to obtain as compared to DDR5 as of now, of course. So personally, I would say I find it hard to recommend the B660 chipset motherboard to enthusiasts who really want to tweak around with the system setting to get the best out of it. But for users who just want a simple plug and play experience and experience the 12th gen CPU themselves, well, the B660M is still something that's reasonable enough and of course takes less effort to operate. For the early adopters, if you're looking for a non-K SKU 12th gen CPUs to pair with a B660 motherboard, yes, it's something I might recommend, but only if you lower your expectation on the memory frequencies and go with a DDR4 3200 as what I've recommended just now to avoid any kind of instability during your usage. And yes, so that's pretty much it. That's all for the video today, and I hope this will help you to at least decide better for your plan to upgrade to the new Intel 12th gen CPU. Of course, jumping on to the hype train because everyone else is like having fun with it, so that's totally up to you. And yeah, do give us a thumbs up and like if you like this video. Let us know what you think of the B660M MORTAR Wi-Fi DDR4 in the comment down below. And until then, I'll see you guys in the next video.